Good morning. Glad everyone's here this morning. It's good to have Terry back. I'm sure Bill's happy for that. Oh, yeah. Are there any announcements or anything we need to pray for before we begin this morning? I know it's fallen completely out of the news, is what's going on in Haiti. And we do the best we can here. And there was this thing going around Facebook of something that happened. And a friend of Sherry's knew this young couple. There was a group of 3 people. 2 of them were a young couple. They looked like in their 20s. Married missionaries down in Haiti. From what I've read and heard and from other things from some of my friends that got some second, third-hand account is these people were out, I believe, going from one mission place to another, go back to where they were staying, and they were stopped by 3 groups of gangs in 3 different vehicles. They did whatever, and eventually they killed this young couple and this other person that was with them, almost just because. And it sounds like there was another gang trying to intervene to stop it, but it wasn't good enough, and they just killed these people for no reason at all. And that's how bad the violence is going on down there. I mean, just for no reason, going down the road, getting stopped, and the gangs are just taking over there. And times not, so I believe you've read some of this and some of the account like that. It's just brutal of what's going on. We think a drive-by shooting we hear was bad. This is totally different what's going on there. So we definitely need to remember, all the missionaries out there in Haiti and everybody in Emmaus House, because you think if they have to go out and get supplies, what's going to happen to them? And the safety of everybody on there. So it is very horrific there, but it's in our news here in America, complete silence. So, and it's a shame of what's going on like that. Yes?
I saw on the news yesterday that the man and the woman their bodies have been delivered to their families.
They have been brought back? Okay. I had not heard that. So I'm glad that at least that happened. Do you anything about the third person? I believe he was a man that was with him a little bit older.
The third person was a Haitian.
Oh, he was? Okay. Okay. So it's did he? The young guy, the young married man. Okay. I mean, it's just tragic what happened down there like that. But I didn't hear that they had been, their bodies had been brought back. That's a little bit of condolence for the parents in that, but it's tragic. Let's bow before we begin. Father, we thank you for this day you've given us, and we thank you for this country that we live in. We got the safeties and things that we have. Father, we're mindful about the tragedies and events going on in Haiti. We ask that you be with all those that are down there, those in the Emmaus House and missionaries down there. Father, we ask that you keep them safe, keep them strong in the faith and the things that they do. We're mindful of the war still going on in Ukraine. Both of these events have fallen out of the national headline news, Father, but we know there are terrible things going on, and your people are suffering because of the events of gangs and violence from other nations. Be with them, Father, strengthen them. Father, as they're surviving through this, they are an example to us of the faith that they have, their faith and loyalty, and still following you with the events that are going on. Father, be with us as we continue in the book of Daniel. Let us keep our ears and hearts open to the words here, that we can grow closer and stronger and learn from the events taking place in Daniel. In Christ's name, amen. Still in Daniel chapter 8, we talked a little bit about the vision that Daniel had, and we pretty much left it off where the Greek Empire was conquering pretty fast. So I did a little more research on the Greek Empire, and Alexander the Great took him 13 years to conquer over 2 million square miles. And doing this is just not the land, it was the various kingdoms and provinces throughout that land. To put that in perspective, Greece today is 49,770 square miles, and he conquered 2 million. The earth, the land mass, is 57.5 million square miles. So he conquered, almost 4%? India is 1.1 million square miles, and Argentina is 1.04 million square miles. So he basically conquered those 2 countries. The United States today, its land mass is 3.67 million square miles. So he conquered in 13 years what would be equivalent to roughly half of the United States. And he did that with the weapons and so on of back in the day. That's how much he did in 13 years. So that's, you might think, wow, that's 13 years, that's a long time. But that is a lot of landmass, a lot of nations, a lot of empires to overthrow, conquer, and start ruling as he's blasting through. That's how fast Alexander the Great was conquering and expanding his empire. And to do this, he had to get a long way from home. And that's one of the things that was possibly into his downfall, of being so far from home. The troops were, we just don't like being this far from home right now. But a little bit about Alexander the Great and how fast he did and how much territory he took in what was really a relatively short period of time. Because we see wars going on today, Russia and Ukraine, a real small nation with the weapons they have. They can't even conquer that little bit. But what Alexander did was pretty phenomenal in his day and time with what he had. We'll be continuing on in chapter 8, verses 9 through 14, and this is still going about the vision that Daniel had. And I believe, yes, we are not into the interpretation yet. It's still Daniel describing some of the vision of what he did have. So I'll be reading verses 9 through 14, and we'll talk about that for a little bit. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. It grew up toward the host of heaven, and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will, and will prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? While the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host be trampled. He said for me, 2,300 evenings and morning, then the holy place will be properly restored. A little bit confusing here, because it's not really explained out what's going on. It's I don't want to say it's cryptic, but it's like the rest of the vision that Daniel had. It's bits and pieces are put out there for him to not completely understand. And as we know with history and some of the other things we study, we can kind of put some of these pieces of the puzzle together. And as it's talking about verse 9, this other horn emerges. And from what we've read and already talked about, and I brought up from some of the historical things, is this horn that's emerging is not from the 10 horns belonging to the fourth kingdom, which we read in chapter 7. Because we're not talking about the fourth kingdom here. We're talking about the third kingdom. So this horn is coming up, the one of the 4 horns belonging to the third kingdom, which we've already talked about in past weeks, which is Greece. And this goes back to also Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which he had the 4 kingdoms, the Babylonians, the Medes and Persians, Greece, and then the Romans. But here, Daniel's vision is really focusing on the third kingdom, which is the Greek Empire. And it brings up this small horn, which is talking about a king that is going to be on this. And I apologize for some of the pronunciations of these words, which is kind of tough for me. It's Antiochus Epiphanes. Is that how you would pronounce that? Yeah. This king? Yeah. I'll take it. I take David as word there. So.
I don't know if it's right for sure, but I've heard Antiochus.
Antiochus? Okay. Google's great. You type in how you pronounce and you listen to it, you write it down like it sounds, and there you go. So that's what I tried to do. But, yeah. Antiochus, that guy, he was the 8th ruler of the Seleucid Empire, and during the last few years of his reign, which was roughly 168 to 164 BC, he was determined to try and destroy the Jewish faith. He did what he could to cut it down by implementing various things, and as he was doing this, he was growing his kingdom. It was in verse 9, it talks about that he started becoming great toward the south and toward the east and toward the beautiful land. He went out to the south to Egypt, so he's expanding down to Egypt. east to the Persia and Armenia area, and it also included the beautiful land. It doesn't say really what that is, but we've heard that before. What do we know the beautiful land as? Palestine, exactly. And we've heard the phrase with that, and it's described in the Old Testament as the land with milk and honey. So we're familiar with the phrase beautiful land. And I don't know if Daniel was through the records that they had back then of various prophets if he knew what the beautiful land was at that point. I don't know if he understood the phrase, if he knew what it meant, but later on I'm sure he'll be given an understanding of it. So we see this king, this empire of Greek starting to expand and spread, and it was this one particular king that was doing it. And then we go on to verse 10, and this kingdom, it grew up to the host of heaven, and we've heard that phrase before. And the host we often hear is referring to God, and the host of heaven we hear usually denotes something like angels or stars. So if we take it as that interpretation, it grew up to the host of heaven, or the angels and stars, and it caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, what is he talking about? I mean, Greek can't grow like that. It can't grow up to the heavens and cause somebody up there to fall. Because we're talking something earthly and something heavenly at that point. But it's all a representation. If we look at the host of heaven denoting like angels and stars, and this empire becoming so big, I think the angels and stars here is symbolic of God's people. Oh, okay. You're ready to pull that trigger? Okay. When I see somebody's hand moving, especially Ted and occasionally Terry there, it's like I know something's coming. But so the trampling down of the hosts of heaven, it sounded like this king Antiochus, he's persecuting God's people. He's persecuting the Jews. That's what's going on here at this time and what we're reading in verse 10. When I say go on at this time, what is going to happen in the future? It's not happening now. It's in Daniel's dream, which is going to come to fruition in the future. In verse 7 it says it even magnified itself, referring to the little horn, referring to the king. It became so big he tried to equal with the commander of the host, which is God. He tried to make himself equal as God. He's puffing himself up, trying to become something that he isn't. He's trying to become a deity. And he's one that kind of changed some of the coins back in the day. And I haven't seen it, but there's historians saying there's coins with his picture on it that had a star over top of his head. And that star kind of symbolized like a crown being on top of his head. And his name was often, he modified it to go by the title of God Manifest. That's what he thought of himself. He thought of himself that he was God Manifest. And he referred to himself as Antiochus Epiphanes, and Epiphanes means illustrious. That's what he thought about himself. He was really patting himself on the back. I'm doing so much, so good here. Look at me. I'm illustrious compared to everything that's going on. But behind his back, there's other people talking about him, which quite often happens. And there's a group of people that called him Epimanes, meaning madman. So as he's patting himself on the back, growing and thinking he's better than God, calling him illustrious, there's people behind his back that saying, buddy, you're nothing but a madman. That's how you're treating people with what you're doing. Yes, you can conquer these things, but you are a madman. You're crazy. And the time that he was going through this, that he was trying to, and he was actually persecuting the Jews, he took away the regular sacrifice from the Jews in the temple. And at the height of this, that he was doing this, he had a pagan altar erected on top of the altar of burnt offerings. He had this altar built, and sacrifices were made to the god Zeus. I mean, can you imagine what the Jewish people felt knowing what was being put on top of the altar that they used to sacrifice to God, and now this guy is sacrificing to his god Zeus? You know, quite a far cry from what the Jewish people were doing, and the blasphemy that this king is doing. And it had to probably dishearten some of the Jewish people at that time. As we go on in verse 12, we're still talking about the horn. We're still talking about Antiochus. He's being used by God to punish God's people. And verse 12 is saying, and on account of the transgression of who? Of God's people. The host will be given over to the horn along the host that are referred to a few verses ago, that God's people would be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling the truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. To help his cause, Antiochus, his cause to break down the Jewish people, he actually had the books of the law that he had, and that the people, the Jewish people he had them torn up, thrown to the ground, he had them burned, and anyone found possessing some of these books of the law who were keeping it, they'd be killed. Just for having these things. That's how he is trying to persecute the Jewish people and trying to almost eliminate their faith and their religion. I read several accounts on this. I didn't write them down. I wasn't going to talk about them because they were horrific. That there was this mother, and she had several children back in the days here that had the book, and she told them, stay faithful, stay strong. They were being tortured and killed in front of her eyes, and she was telling them, be strong, stay true to your faith. Then after they died, they persecuted her, and they did the same thing to her. It was, quite tragic. And there were other people that if they had the law or the stay unfaithful, they would torture them and kill them in public to be an example of, you do this is what's going to happen to you. So it was basically no holds barred for this king to torture the Jewish people if they stayed true to the faith, or even if you had a book of the law. Can you imagine somebody coming to our house and, we're going to kill you because you have a Bible? We don't see that here. But there are some nations that is the case. Here today, that is the case. You have a Bible, they can kill you for it. Just because. Yes, sir.
My Bible says in verse 12, because of the rebellion of the host of the saints, footnote, rebellion of the armies.
Rebellion of the armies for being the saints? I mean, if it's the saints, we've been called the armies of God, haven't we? I mean, I could do a little more look to what the armies of that was. I hadn't come across that word.
What translation?
What translation, Dave?
See, I'm pretty sure, I can't say this for soccer, but I'm pretty sure they're assuming that this is talking about something at the end of the world that has to do with Christians rather than when Jesus is going to come. So they're using a word as a possible translation that would promote their point of view, I think. Gary?
Could be God's army, is that what we're going
I don't know where those words are coming from, because I don't see them in my text at all.
I don't even see it in this NIV.
What translation do you have?
It's a footnote.
It's in a footnote.
Oh, it's a footnote?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I don't think those words are actually in the text, but
They're
I'm
substituting
thinking Ted's got
The-
the right idea.
They're
They're substituting armies for the Lord's
people.
people. Because the footnote says rebellion, the armies. So they're substituting the armies for the Lord's people. The time period that they're trying to promote with what that footnote says has to do with what they think is going to happen after us. Sometime in the future from now, not from sometime in the future from Daniel until the time of Jesus, like we're trying to say that's what's happening.
When you say they, referring to the translator to put that footnote in. Okay. You good, Dave?
Yeah.
As this is going on, Daniel, in verse 13, remember, this is a vision. He's in this vision. He's, so to speak, living this vision, but he's not in the actual place physically, but he's here so he can see things, hear things. And in verse 13, he says, he heard a holy one speaking, and then he heard another holy one say to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? And, he hears how long, and quite often when something like that is asked, it's referring to a question is regarding suffering. And we see that especially in the book of Psalms. But we're not talking about suffering here in verse 13. This question about how long is referring to only the portion of the vision that Daniel had and is regarding of the trampling of the regular sacrifices and the holy place, the temple. It's how long is going to last on of the destruction of what's going on with the temple, not the suffering of God's people. So that it could be a little confusing to say, okay, how long? Because we were just talking about the war going on with God's people, the saints, as far as what Antiochus is doing. But now we're talking about what's happening here with the temple. And the guy's answers is going to go on. Yes, Terry.
We got details here, and sometimes it's hard to know what a particular word is saying, but if we keep straight the larger picture here, we're talking about the time that the Greeks controlled Palestine. We're talking about the time when the temple sacrifices stopped, and you mentioned about this guy making a alternative altar, but you didn't mention what he offered on that altar. Antiochus offered pigs.
Yes, you're right. And
this was
to Zeus. I said to not what, but yes.
This was atrocious to the Jews.
Yes.
This was beyond their capability to understand God even letting it happen. And yes, the Jews had been not as good as they should have been. But this is during the time of the Greeks, when this guy hated Judaism. He was trying to kill the Jewish religion. He stopped the animal sacrifices. These sacrifices had to be done twice a day, and had been done twice a day for, 800, 900 years? Except for a couple of times they were broken. But this was where a foreign person came into Jerusalem, stopped the animal sacrifices. To the Jews, that was just impossible. It couldn't happen. But it did happen here. And that's why, not jumping ahead, but later on, this guy is referred to as the abomination of desolation, which is one of the worst, how can I say this? For the Bible, it's swearing. It's one of the worst possible things that you can say about somebody. And this guy is who it's talking about. And why do we not know about this guy? Because it was in the 400 years after the Old Testament ended and the New Testament began. And so he's not discussed in the Bible in detail because that's that period of time that there was no revelation. But that's the general thing here. And so verse 13, which you're getting to, is talking about the holy place and the host to be trampled, and how long will the regular sacrifice, how long is this going to happen where the sacrifices are going to stop? How long is this going to happen where the temple is going to be treated in an atrocious manner? And it caused the Jews to want to kill this guy real bad.
Hey Terry, is he the same guy that put a statue in the temple?
I think that's a
That
different
was somebody else?
I think that was somebody else.
Okay. I can't remember if the statue was of a god or if it was like Caesar or a
He
king.
might have put a statue of himself. There may be something about him putting a statue of himself in the temple area. Not in the temple itself, but he's a great guy.
Right. But it was still an abomination to the Jews, right?
Good grief. The temple was holy ground.
Yeah.
And he
But not to him.
wanted to make it
Right.
holy to his religion, honoring him.
Yes.
And to the
That-
Jews, it was just,
That's where he was trying to make himself
Beyond
above
fair.
God. Yes.
it was an abomination in the eyes of God to the Jews.
Bill, I did not find anything going through all this about a statue of him being erected into the temple. Any of the things that I have found. And yes, I'm glad you brought about the pigs. I read that, I just didn't put that down, but yeah, because that is a key factor, because definitely define the altar there, and it was, a smack in the face to the Jewish people. Ted, then Tom. He had his hand up first, sorry.
I don't want to steal your thunder, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but we've got to know the outside markers for these things, or we don't get it. And that doesn't come, unfortunately, Daniel doesn't tell us in chronological four other kingdoms that arose after Alexander the Great no longer exist. Well, that started happening as Rome started taking over between the times of around 200 BC and I think it was 27 BC when Cleopatra in Egypt finally was under Roman control. So the time period he's talking about has to happen sometime between 200 BC approximately and 27 BC, which is what you're saying, and I think is true, is the 167 when Antiochus Epiphanes went into the temple and proclaimed.
Tom?
I was just gonna say, some of the other reason I did too, is part of what prompted this activity was, he also had a high priest killed.
Yes.
As part of this, and then this was sort of a progression to destroy the Jewish religion, so you kill a high priest, you bring your own idol in there of Zeus, and you sort of feel, I mean, you kind of see the Jews are gonna be trying to stay aligned with the one true God, and the Greeks, of course, have got this whole menagerie of gods that they worship who would be false gods, would be idolatry in the eyes of the Jews. So, I think, I also read that a lot of that had to do when we talk about the rebellion. The Jews were rebelling because they see him moving in this direction of trying to turn the temple worship over to pagan gods rather than the one true God. You kill the priest, you stop the daily sacrifice, you put your idol in there, you start sacrificing vile things on the idol. And right away you got an uprising taking place. And so, I mean, a lot of that, like you said, it's not the Bible, it's just you've got to read it
Yes.
historically to pick up some of that stuff and then filter out what's real and what's somebody's opinion or whatever.
And as you all said in some form or fashion, it's been building up, this frustration that these Jewish people. Remember, going all the way back to Nebuchadnezzar, God's people, the Jewish people, were captives. But their religion wasn't put to the test like it is being here. They were still allowed to do certain things under Nebuchadnezzar. They were still allowed to do something under the Medes and Persians. They were allowed to do various things to still follow and make sacrifices to God. But when it comes to the Greeks, it started getting more and more persecution, more and more of their liberties were being taken away, more and more of their faith was being squashed because they couldn't do the things that they've done for hundreds and hundreds of years. Ted?
Got to keep in mind all the way through this, that the purpose of Daniel, these foretellings here, was to give a time span where all the other prophets told things about Jesus when he would come, that's not promised seed. Daniel is giving us an idea, or giving Daniel approximately when. So all of this has to do with pinpointing time. Time not in the future from us, but time up to and including the time when Jesus came. And when he's talking about this, one of the upshots I think we're supposed to get out of this eventually is that this abomination that comes did not destroy the temple. And it isn't until later, when Jesus talks in Matthew 24, that he brings that term up from Daniel again and says, now it's actually going to cease. He's telling Daniel at this time, it's going to stop for a while, but it's going to come back up because the Jews are going to repent. Later on, in Matthew 24, it's the end. Jesus used the exact same words that Daniel's using here. And that's going to happen in 70 AD, like we talked about in Wednesday night class.
Yep, one more.
Bill first.
Oh, go ahead.
I did a quick search, and it said that Caligula, a Roman emperor, had talked about putting in a statue and making it
Okay.
a god. But he did say that Antiochus IV placed the statue of Baal, Ashma, Maim, in the temple in Jerusalem in the 2nd century. Led to a fierce uprising in the state between the great powers of those days. To commemorate this event and the cleansing of the temple, the Jews celebrate Hanukkah every November.
Okay. So he put not a idol to him,
He put it-
but a Baal.
He put an idol of
Okay.
different
of a different God in there. Okay.
That's you know another
It-
thing too. I mean that's how much he despised Jews. He offered pigs on it, and he put
A different God in there.
statue of one of his gods in there.
Terry?
We talked a long time about Daniel chapter 2, where it talks about the four kingdoms.
Yes.
In Daniel chapter 8, it's talking about just two of them. It's talking gonna establish an eternal kingdom. So here in Daniel 8, why is Daniel 8 here? Because here in Daniel 8, he's not talking about all four kingdoms.
Just the
He's
two.
talking about just two, and the main one he talks about is Greece. And why does he talk about Greece? Because here is where this guy desecrates the temple. This is where the guy takes away the sacrifices and tries to destroy Judaism. And this was something that is still remembered by Jews today. These events that occurred here a long time before Christ is still something that Jews in their worship and in their, what do you call it, their holy days and things like that, they're still remembering this time when Jerusalem was desecrated by, I call it Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was actually Antiochus IV.
Correct.
The previous kings, but the 1, 2, and 3 are not talked about.
Only 4.
But this guy was the bad one.
Yes.
And that's why Daniel 8, I believe, is here, because it's wanting to zero in on this period of time where the Jews were going to face the greatest attempt, before the Romans maybe, of really doing away with their faith. And he did succeed for a while, but then, again, if we get in the future, which we're not going to be doing for a while maybe, but then you have the Jews actually fighting a war against this guy, and they win. And this guy has a big hunk of the Grecian Empire under his control. But the Jews actually win the battle, the Maccabees. And there are coins today you can still buy, and I'm telling you, they're not cheap. But you can buy the coins that the Jews coined after they won their independence from the Greek powers, and you can see the pictures on it of the year in which and their year they counted was when the temple sacrifices started again. To them, that was the huge event that they got the sacrifices going again.
During that time frame of the Maccabees.
Yeah, so that's, to go along, everything Terry says, I agree with 100%, but I still think that there's a purpose behind, another purpose behind what he's doing here, and it is to show that that is not going to be the time when Jerusalem is actually destroyed. You're going to think that it is because of what happened, but it's not. There's another time coming.
Yeah, agreed, yes.
That's what can get very confusing about this. As I'm studying it, you think this is what's happening. You go down this path and you read more, and then you get this little curveball, and you go off to the side. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Everything I just thought was happening, it's a different time frame, and you got to keep going and digging, and so to speak, unpulling that ball of string and seeing what's really, really there. And sometimes I regret doing the book of Daniel, but it's helped me understand how to study a little bit harder and do a little different things. And it was definitely worthwhile to dig into this and see how the prophecy of Christ is shown in here. Not necessarily of Christ himself, but what's going to be coming down the road. Not the end of time, but when the church is established. And this is one of the things we've seen laid out in Daniel, and we're seeing what's going to be laid out here in chapter 8, I'm sorry, of what's talking about the temple at that point. Anything else on this right now? Great comments. I appreciate it.
Do you have a time period or how long this lasted? Very short.
No.
Okay, well,
Not. I can't say it lasted 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. No.
if you do the math, when it goes down to 300 or 2,300 days,
Correct?
that's like 6.3 years. Yeah. I mean,
But-
that's,
Yeah, but that's
I mean, that's just, I just wondered if it lasted like, that short time.
that 2,300 evenings and days is, I want to say, figurative. It's saying it's not an infinite amount of time. It's a finite amount of time, but it's not saying it is exactly 2,300 days.
And it doesn't say days, it says
Evenings and mornings.
which may refer to sacrifice.
So,
Evening and morning sacrifice.
but
I
I
just got done listening one more time for about the 4th time to Richard Rogers this last week on this very topic. And he says over and over again, he says, I have no idea why Daniel is using 2,300 days, okay? Or
But-
2,300 evenings and mornings. He says, I think the Jews knew, there may be somebody on earth that know, but he says, I don't know. And if Richard Rogers doesn't know, I don't know.
Well, if Ted don't know, I don't know. So, but to me, it goes along with, you know, like what you taught that one class, times, and half times. It's not you can't take the 2,300 as a specific number of days, hours, whatever it is. It's,
The one thing that I theorize, and I may be totally washed up on this, but the one thing that I theorize, and I actually wrote it down because it's a little bit hard to understand, that 2,300 evenings and mornings ends up being 1,150 days. 11, that's 2,300 divided by 2. 1,150 is short of the 42 months or the 1,260 days. In other words, it's less than that. So what we might be talking about is this indefinite period of time, but it is less than time or before the time when the Messiah is actually coming. That's the only thing I can think of, but I have no idea whether I'm right.
if God wanted us to know the exact number at that point, in Daniel's vision, it would have been an exact number and time structure given. If he wanted us to know that it would be exactly 2,300 days, I think he would have said in Daniel's vision, it will be in 2,300 days, this will happen. But it's going along with the other the other phrases that are used in here. It is used as a representative of, there is going to be an end, but you don't know yet, and I'm not telling you yet. So at the end of this 2,300 evenings and mornings, this indefinite period of time, what's going to happen? It's that the holy place will be properly restored. And we've already talked about through the conversation here what's going to be happening to the temple and things at that. But some of these things are just going to start coming back into place at the end of this time structure that what had said these 2,300 evenings and mornings. Now, a lot of what we just talked about in verses 14 and on through here, 9 through 14, I believe, a lot of the information I got did come from the Bible, but a lot of it came from elsewhere. And last week, Kira was kind enough to let me borrow a couple of books. And it's called Between the Testaments. I'd never heard of these books before, and I am not much of a book reader. I bet I read these books more than I read any book through high school and college combined. And they're only roughly 120, 125 pages each, but I think I went through both of them twice. And I wanted to put some of that information in here because it's pertinent to this time structure of what's going on in verses through 9 through 14, but there's no way I could do it justice in a week to put it together. So maybe next time I teach 5-6 years down the road, I will do that as my subject. What's so funny, Ted? Hey, I might not be done in 5-6 years. I don't know. But I think I could put a halfway decent class together with those books and the structure that, between the Testaments, because everything I've mentioned here about the Medes and Persians of their coming up, the Greeks, the Romans that we've talked about briefly, there's so much information here. The rise of the Greek Empire, the battle between the Medes and Persians, all these little things I give little snippets of. The Assyrian Empire, which started in 875, the Medes and Persians, which were roughly 500 BC, the Greek Empire, which was kind of in power in 336, the Ptolemies in roughly 305, the Seleucids in roughly 223. Then there's the Hellenistic period. I've heard of it, never really understood it, so I started reading. This all happened after Alexander the Great's death, up to, which I believe somebody mentioned, Cleopatra, up to her death. So this period happened in there, but what is this Hellenistic period? And during this time, translations such as the Septuagint and philosophies like Stoicism all came into play. We don't read that, all the detail in the Bible that's given to us. And during this period, religions were being transformed, new movements were happening. They were trying to squash and squelch out any religions that was there, including the faith that God's people, the Jews, had. They were trying to get rid of the faith there. They were trying to get rid of that religion. That happened in this time period of what was going on in verses 9 through 14. But also what happened between the Old Testament, New Testament. It's not like when we read Malachi to Matthew, it's not like it ends and it picks up right there. There's a time frame, there's a gap. And that's what, these books Terry lent me, talk about, the time and frame. And that is what some of the stuff I'm talking about. So the Hellenistic period's in there, all the other things. Hate is in there. Well, what is that? I had no clue. And this was a group of people, of God's people, that they were maintaining the law of God. They were maintaining their faith. And they were the ones that they considered the Greek life, the Greek philosophy, a threat to their faith and their belief. They were the ones that were holding true to the Jewish faith. All of this was happening. And Terry mentioned the Maccabee period of time. That was there from 142 to roughly 60, 63 BC, which is the persecution of the Jews. And this is when we're talking about Antiochus and what he was doing. And all of a sudden we know the Roman Empire comes into play. Well, we don't see about the Roman Empire being established and coming into power in the Bible. But it happened. And the Roman Empire was really founded in 753 BC. A long time before what we're reading and talk about here in Daniel. I mean, the Medes and Persians were roughly in 500, but Rome was established, 200 years before that?
It was small.
It was small. It was just a city.
Small and tiny and didn't have
Yes.
any real power.
But it was happening during this period of time. And it's not recorded in the Bible of what's going on. And I think we need to know these things. And I don't know how cities are established. You get a little city around here, people establish it. You get a couple of brothers come, hey, we're going to make the town of Otisville. That's how Rome was established in 753. The brothers Romulus and Remus started the city of Rome. Two brothers started it. And then what did we have come out of Rome that we really don't see in the Bible? Julius Caesar, Antipater, Herod, Octavian, Pontius Pilate. We don't see how these folks who have keys to the history, and Pontius Pilate, how did he come into power, but yet we see he's in power and Jesus is before him. We don't have all that history. I think it's important for us to know some of these things, and Daniel's not the class to do it. It's a nice interruption. I could have took a left turn and took another 4, 5, 6 weeks, which you probably would have appreciated. But
We're pushing into fall already.
I'll be done by hunting season, so. But I think that would be a great class to have, and there's so much detail in there. I wanted to go into it, and I already took 10 minutes on this, and I didn't even scratch the surface. And this information is important for us to understand some of the things that are going on in Daniel, some of the things we study and see in the New Testament. All of this is happening at the same time. I don't want to say God's got all these plates spinning, but all these plates are spinning of things that are happening in the world, and God is controlling each and every one of these things that are happening. Terry.
Just in passing, you said Hellenistic. Hellenistic is just another word for Greek influence. It meant the Greek culture trying to come into the Holy Land and change the religion of the Jews. And if I went into details about some things they did in Jerusalem in trying to replace the Jewish faith, some of it's not proper to talk about in public. But it was, and it drove the Jews nuts because they saw this was a real attempt to kill their faith. And it was this 400-year period of time between the end of Malachi and the beginning of Matthew.
I did that 2 different ways in the Bible. It's important for Bible students to know that he had big gaps in 2 places.
For a reason.
Patriarchal period from the beginning of Genesis to the end of Genesis. Then, of course, there's a 400-year gap before Exodus opens up. And then we start the Mosaic period. And then at the end of Malachi, there's another 400-year gap between that and the time of Christ, when the Christian dispensation is going to start. He marked those beginning and end really good. But there's a lot, like you say, of history that happened in between. And we
A lot.
can read about some of that history in the apocryphal books that some people think are inspired with those, the books of Maccabees, that are in some all that Catholic Bible is one of those.
Yep. Yes, Tom.
Really quick, the other thing, the other statutes, they developed during this time of turmoil and influenced by the Greeks and so many other places, and so maybe originally they were sort of there to help steer the Jewish people and keep them true to the law. But of course, we saw train came off the tracks as they moved forward, but that's another thing that we often don't read about, but that's
Right.
when they had their genesis or their origin.
I mean, all of these people are important to, you know, the establishment of the church, even though they happen in the background. They all happened. I mean, we can read bits and pieces of some of these people in Nehemiah, Esther, Ezekiel, Daniel here, but the root of the history is all from historical records, not from the biblical records that we have here. And it's important for us to know and understand, have a little understanding of how did these things come into play for the Romans to be so powerful and these things to go on. One last one.
You mentioned the Epicureans. The Stoics and the Epicureans developed during that 400 year gap before Matthew. And they're really important when we get to the book of Acts because that's who Paul's talking to when he's in Athens. And if we don't know who he's talking to, we don't know why he's even saying what he's saying.
So if we don't know this stuff, it's like Daniel having his vision. He doesn't understand it, so he doesn't understand what this visions mean. If we don't understand some of these things that happen in that 400 window period between the Old and New Testament, how can we truly give a grasp of what's going on with the New Testament itself? I apologize, I went way over this morning. Anything else before we end it for today? Thanks for being here. We'll get back into Daniel next week. Thank you.